A common belief, according to which designer Nikolai Alexandrovich Astrov received the assignment for a two-man turret for the T-70 tank during its development, is fundamentally incorrect. A two-man turret is not even mentioned in the list of improvements specified in the test report for the experimental GAZ-70. It is also not mentioned in State Defense Committee Resolution No. 1394, titled, "On the Organization of T-70 Tank Production at the Molotov-Gorki Automobile Plant of the People's Commissariat of Medium Machine Building." Experts considered the working conditions inside the turret to be quite normal. Consequently, there were no activities concerning a two-man turret even in the plans. The situation changed in the summer of 1942 when T-70 tanks entered combat. In early July, reports emerged from the Bryansk and Central Fronts, the study of which triggered the beginning of work to modernize the tank. As for the turret, the catalyst for starting work on its two-man version was a letter from Guards Colonel N.D. Chukina, commander of the 1st Guards Tank Brigade. 1. It is difficult for a T-70 tank commander to simultaneously observe the battlefield, load the cannon and machine gun, and conduct aim fire. The work of a company commander is further complicated, as in addition to these tasks, he must also command the company. It is necessary to expand the tank turret to accommodate 2 people. On July 15, 1942, a meeting was held to improve the tank's design, attended by the leadership of the People's Commissariat of Medium Machine Building, representatives from Gazi, and the main armored directorate of the Red Army. The two-man turret was listed as the 4th and final item for improvement. According to the meeting's minutes, it was decided to prepare a turret mock-up by August 1st, and to test the artillery system by August 5th to determine the feasibility of placing a 45mm cannon in such a turret. In August, the automobile plant's design bureau built a wooden mock-up of the two-man turret. Work on the turret was conducted more as a background activity because higher priority was given to modernizing the chassis. The acceleration of work on the turret and the modernized GAZ-203 engine occurred only after the release of State Defense Committee Resolution No. 2276-S titled On T-70 Tanks on September 8. Point 4 of this resolution prescribed that a tank with a two-man turret be prepared by October 4, and that enhanced engines were also expected by the same date. A new tank was not built from scratch. Instead, a T-70 with serial number 2008-207, manufactured in August 1942, was used as the basis. This was one of the tanks that had undergone tests as part of a program to reinforce the chassis and sides. Consequently, its side armor thickness was not 0.59 inches, but 0.98 inches. Minimal changes were made to the chassis. Due to the two-man turret's turret ring diameter increasing from 38.03 inches to 43.78 inches, the roof of the fighting compartment had to be redesigned. Previously, the plate consisted of 2 parts, which allowed the engine to be removed without removing the turret. Now, to remove the engine, it was necessary to first remove the turret and then the roof of the fighting compartment. During the development of the two-man turret, the Factory Design Bureau, led by V.A. Dedkoff, based its design on the welded turret of the T-70. Since the turret became significantly wider, all its elements had to be redesigned, including the movable armor of the gun mask. The turret also received an extended rear niche. This allowed not only the radio station to be placed inside, but also 2 ammunition racks, each holding 10 rounds for the 45mm cannon. The turret hatch, used by both the commander gunner and the loader, was also redesigned. However, the hatch turned out to be quite heavy. A similar issue was encountered with the T-34's wide hatch. Furthermore, the commander lost the all-around observation device, which was located precisely in the hatch. Instead, the commander received a PTK periscopic device, and the loader received a periscopic device similar to the one located in the T-70's turret hatch. The turret also received a floor, which improved the working conditions for the crew. The redesigning of the T-70 for a two-man turret was completed closer to the end of September 1942. Factory trials began on September 27th and continued until October 2nd. Their purpose was to determine the gun's rate of fire and the ease of operation within the two-man turret. To ensure accurate results, firing trials were conducted by 4 crews. Each crew fired first from the two-man turret and then from the one-man turret. It was found that the rate of fire in the two-man turret was 8 to 9 rounds per minute. In comparison, the one-man turret could not achieve more than 4 to 5 rounds per minute. Accuracy increased from 47.5% to 71%. The gunner could fire without being distracted by observing the battlefield because the loader also had a periscopic viewing device. However, there were also drawbacks. The turret's seat mounts and ammunition stowage prevented equally convenient access to rounds at various angles of horizontal rotation. In certain turret positions, the rate of fire dropped to 5 rounds per minute. The left stowage rack, holding 10 rounds, could only be used for transporting ammunition because it was inaccessible to the loader. When the tank was moving, rounds repeatedly fell out of the stowage racks. A problem similar to the T-34's turret hatch recurred. The large hatch was excessively heavy. Additionally, while the tank was moving, the loader hit his head on the handle of the signal hatch and the travel lock for the main hatch. The trigger pedal was inconveniently positioned. In total, there were more than 15 various defects and shortcomings. The turret required significant refinement. Nevertheless, the concept of a two-man turret proved to be sound. The tank, designated the T-80 in the report, was recommended for adoption by the Red Army after the identified shortcomings were eliminated. Work on modifying the two-man turret began during a period of rapidly increasing interest in developing self-propelled anti-aircraft guns. This interest was linked to increased activity by German ground attack aircraft, as well as the capture of a German report on the trials of the Henschel HS-129 ground attack aircraft. Priority was given to developing self-propelled anti-aircraft guns armed with either twin DSHK heavy machine guns or a 37mm automatic aircraft cannon. In the autumn of 1942, another alternative approach emerged. This was because American M3 medium tanks began to be used on the Soviet-German front starting in May 1942. The 37mm gun located in the turret of these vehicles had a high maximum elevation angle, which allowed it to engage aircraft. Furthermore, such high elevation angles also proved useful in urban combat. It was not surprising that the idea arose to equip the new tank with a gun featuring a high maximum elevation angle. Interestingly, a similar idea had occurred to Soviet designers 5 years earlier. At that time, the desire to increase the vertical traverse angle of tank guns arose from experience gained during battles in Spain. At the very end of October 1942, work began on redesigning the turret. Since the single-hatch design proved unsuccessful, it was decided to create separate hatches for the commander and gunner and for the loader. The loader received not just a hatch, but a commander's cupola equipped with a periscopic viewing device. The upper part of the cupola rotated on its axis, giving the loader a full 360-degree view. For the commander, a similar periscopic device was installed in place of the original commander's periscopic sight. The extended rear bustle remained in place, but its internal contents underwent some changes. In parallel with the hatch modifications, the turret's overall structure was also somewhat redesigned. Additionally, considering the shortcomings identified during the trials of the first turret, the design of the seats and the turret floor was altered. The front part of the turret, along with its gun mount, also changed. Because it was necessary to significantly increase the elevation angle of the turret gun, the gun mount had to be redesigned. In the new turret, the elevation angle increased to 60 degrees. The previous sights were not well suited for anti-aircraft firing, so a K-8T collimator sight was added to the telescopic sight. For its use, a separate hatch appeared in the turret roof, which opened when firing at air targets. The Gaz-80, as this tank was called at the Molotov automobile plant, was certainly not a full-fledged, self-propelled anti-aircraft gun, but it could definitely be used as a means of combating aircraft. The standard telescopic sight underwent modification. A shortened version was developed, which was designated TP-80. For the construction of the redesigned GAZ-80, one of the production T-70B tanks from October 1942, which had previously undergone various tests, was used as the base. The chassis received a modified fighting compartment roof. The combat weight of the tank reached 12.35 US tons, so boosting the GAZ-203 engine became an urgent necessity. The compression ratio increased from 5.6.1 to 6.5.1, which increased the power of each engine in the twin setup from 70 to 85 horsepower. The total power of the power plant, designated as 80 or M80, was 170 horsepower. The second prototype T-80 was ready by early December 1942. First, the tank underwent factory tests, during which it covered 34.18 miles. Then the tank was transferred to the NIBT proving ground in Kubinka, near Moscow. Here, the tests involved one crew from the 223rd Tank Regiment who already had experience operating the T-70, as well as 2 crews from the 30th Guards Tank Regiment who were equipped with heavy KV-1s tanks. N.A. Astrov, the chief designer of the T-80, was present from the Molotov automobile plant. Firing from the tank's weaponry was conducted both from a stationary position and while on the move. The crew of the 223rd Tank Regiment fired 10 shots first from the T-80 and then from the T-70. When firing from a stationary position, 10 shots from the T-80's gun were fired in 2 minutes 45 seconds, achieving 6 hits. The T-70 achieved the same in 4 minutes 42 seconds, with the number of hits reduced to 3. When firing from short stops, each tank fired 10 shots in 4 minutes 15 seconds. The T-80's gun achieved 3 hits, while the T-70 achieved 4. This was the T-70's only victory. Afterwards, it consistently performed worse. The crews of the 30th Guards Tank Regiment showed even higher results. For example, the second crew was able to fire 10 shells from a stationary position in 1 minute 20 seconds with 10 hits. From short stops, the same 10 shots with 7 hits were fired in 2 minutes 17 seconds. In addition, these crews conducted barrage fire, practicing shooting at aircraft. The first crew fired 10 shots in 31 seconds, while the second did so in 37 seconds. Naturally, a full-fledged self-propelled anti-aircraft gun would have a rate of fire an order of magnitude higher. On the other hand, concentrated fire from several tanks could certainly create problems for attacking aircraft. Road tests were also conducted. In total, the T-80 traveled 133.60 miles, of which 26.10 miles were on highways, 37.28 miles on dirt roads, and 57.79 miles on forest roads. The average speed on dirt roads was 14.79 miles per hour, consuming 44.11 gallons of fuel every 62.14 miles. Under difficult road conditions, the average driving speed dropped to 7.52 miles per hour, and fuel consumption increased to 48.64 gallons every 62.14 miles. When driving on steep slopes, the vehicle performed at least as well as the T-70. The testers also highly praised the tank's visibility. The results of the tests, which concluded by December 9th, were clear. The Commission identified only 2 significant drawbacks: complicated access to the power plant and a lack of interchangeable parts for a number of components for the boosted engine. Otherwise, the T-80 clearly surpassed the T-70B. On December 18th, the test results were reported to Stalin. On December 27, 1942, he signed State Defense Committee Resolution number 2666 on the organization of T-80 tank production at the former Mitishi railcar building plant. According to the document, 25 tanks of this type were to be produced in Mitishi in April 1943, 50 in May, and 100 in June. The resolution did not mention that the Gorki automobile plant named after Molotov would also assemble the new tanks. The Factory Design Bureau provided Plant Number 40, which was reorganized from the former Plant Number 592, with technical documentation, engines, and several other components and assemblies. From mid-December 1942, the Design Bureau began refining the technical documentation for the T-80. The tank began to take on its final form. The turret underwent modifications once again, though this time they were less significant. Primarily, the location of the commander gunner's hatch changed, and the turret roof received a distinctive slant. This modification was related to the experimental turret's imbalance. However, this is where things get interesting. Despite the Gorki automobile plant not officially producing the T-80, the Consolidated Wartime Report listed 4 tanks of this type manufactured in Gorki. Other sources also mentioned 5 T-80s produced at the Gorki automobile plant. Although T-80 production at the Gorki automobile plant named after Molotov was not planned, in practice, by January 1943, work to prepare for its release was well underway, initiated by the plant management and the People's Commissariat of Medium Machine Building. By early March, the first reference model of the T-80 was built. For its assembly, the hull and turret manufactured at plant number 176 were used. This plant also supplied hulls and turrets for plant number 40, so the vehicles from the 2 factories had no significant differences. This also applied to the driver mechanic's hatch. The experimental T-80 had a cast hatch, while the reference model had a stamped one. During the tests of the first production T-80, problems were discovered. After the 11th shot, the bracket of the elevation mechanism's recoil rod broke. Work began to rectify the issue. Meanwhile, by March 11th, 2 more tanks were ready, and an additional 6 were in assembly. By the end of the month, 8 T-80s were completed. However, only 7 of them were fully equipped with all components. An additional 9 tanks had been laid down and were awaiting assembly. The reason these tanks did not appear in the Gorki automobile plant named after Molotov's production reports was that they had not been officially accepted. In his monthly report, senior military representative Okunev wrote that due to problems during firing at maximum elevation angles, the tanks were only conditionally accepted. Alongside construction, refinement work continued. For instance, hatches were developed in the bottom plate, allowing the lower engine crankcases to be removed without dismantling them. The Factory Design Bureau also developed a movable armored gun mask of welded construction. However, many of the planned modernization features were never implemented into mass production. By April, work on the T-80 at the Gorki automobile plant named after Molotov gradually began to wane. The tanks with defective gun mounts standing in the factory yard continued to await their turn. Since they were never accepted, the plant could not even send them to training units. The solution to the problem was to limit the elevation angle to 25 degrees. The main armored directorate of the Red Army approved this proposal with a resolution stating that such T-80s could only be used in training units. However, only 2 tanks were successfully transferred there. They became part of the 1st Separate Training Tank Brigade. This occurred in June 1943 when the Gorki automobile plant named after Molotov was subjected to bombardment. It is quite possible that the remaining vehicles were destroyed during this event. At least then, it becomes clear why 4 tanks appear in the Gorki automobile plant named after Molotov's report. 2 training tanks plus 2 experimental prototypes. Based on the tank model used to test the VT-43 system, tanks produced by the Molotov automobile plant had no handrails on the turret, and their exhaust system lacked protection. The factory's design bureau's last work on the T-80 project was in May and June of 1943. Afterward, partly due to the plant's bombing, no further experimental work took place. The plant could no longer focus on the T-80. The idea of strengthening the armament proposed by Astrov remained unfulfilled. Instead of a 45mm gun, he suggested installing a 76mm regimental gun. Another idea, which at least survived on paper, was to install a 50mm breech-loading mortar, S-11. This was developed by the Central Artillery Design Bureau, and in the summer of 1943, work on this topic was quite active. Soviet designers borrowed the idea for such a mortar from the British Valentine tanks. However, for various reasons, primarily due to the halt in T-80 production, this project was never materialized. In March of 1943, factory trials were conducted for the 45mm VT-42 gun, installed in a T-70 light tank. This weapon had the ballistics of the 45mm anti-tank gun model of 1942. A logical idea emerged to install this more powerful weapon into the T-80 as well. The redesigned system was designated VT-43. It was installed in one of the tanks produced at the Molotov automobile plant. Thanks to the VT-43 trial reports, it is possible to see what a production T-80, built in Gorki but never reaching combat units, looked like. The topic of a 45mm tank gun with M42 ballistics for firing from the T-80 was included in the experimental work plan of OKB-172 and Plant No. 235 as early as late December 1942. Additionally, in January of 1943, OKB-15 launched a design program for a universal installation of the OKB-15 45mm gun in the T-80 tank. This involved the NS-45 automatic aircraft cannon, which was a development of the Zoot-37 project. In this area, these efforts did not progress beyond preliminary orders and conceptual design. On May 27th, a technical meeting took place, attended by the chief designer of Plant No. 235, E.A. Galliance, as well as representatives from OKB-172, the main armored directorate of the Red Army, and the deputy chief designer of Plant No. 40, G.I. Kashtanov. At the meeting, the VT-43 project was approved, and an experimental model of the gun was planned to be installed on a T-80 by June 15th. The system was planned to be tested under a condensed program, after which Plant Number 235 was to produce the first 10 guns intended for shipment to Plant Number 40 for installation in production tanks. To ensure the start of VT-43 production and its implementation at Plant Number 40, a group of designers from Plant Number 235 was sent to Mitishi. The plan adopted at the meeting differed significantly from what actually transpired. Plant Number 40 could not spare resources for the VT-43, so the gun was installed in one of the T-80 tanks produced by the Molotov automobile plant. This vehicle was never officially accepted, meaning officially it did not exist on paper. The installation of the VT-43 caused no particular issues. However, the vehicle arrived at the Gorki Artillery Science and Testing Proving Ground on September 2, 1943, by which time production of the T-80 at Plant Number 40 had ceased, and preparations for manufacturing the Su-15M were underway. Nevertheless, trials began on September 27th and continued until October 15th. A total of 850 shots were fired from the new gun, of which 309 used an enhanced charge, 319 were armor-piercing rounds with a normal charge, 71 were subcaliber rounds, and 151 were high-explosive fragmentation rounds. The firing results showed that barrel durability and accuracy were quite satisfactory. Some remarks were noted regarding the semi-automatic mechanism. The recoil mechanisms, re-engineered for the more powerful system, functioned normally. There were also no complaints about the aiming mechanisms. The average rate of fire was 12 to 13 rounds per minute. Overall, the system passed the trials, but it was clearly introduced too late. It is surprising, however, that additional tests were conducted in April 1944. This time, the possibility of anti-aircraft fire from the VT-43 machine gun mount was studied. The experiment showed that the effectiveness of using the T-80 tank as a self-propelled anti-aircraft gun was low. The very fact that these tests were conducted causes some bewilderment, as their results were quite predictable. Moreover, what was the point of testing a tank that had been taken out of production by the end of August 1943? Organizing the production of T-80 tanks at Factory Number 40 was much more difficult than in Gorki. The team in Mitishi faced a significantly more complex task. Of course, they already had experience producing the SG-122 self-propelled gun, but converting existing chassis into self-propelled artillery guns was one thing, and producing a tank from scratch was another. Effectively, a new factory was being built on the site of an old one, which was certainly not a simple undertaking. Furthermore, State Defense Committee Resolution No. 2-6 stipulated quite strict deadlines. By April, Factory No. 40 was obliged to deliver the first 25 tanks. The factory was certainly not left to fend for itself. To help organize production, specialists were sent from factories. No. 183, No. 174, UZTM, and CHKZ, who provided on-site consultations for several months. The Design Bureau of Factory No. 592 was reorganized into the Design Bureau of Factory No. 40, while some specialists, including E.V. Sinilshchikov and S.G. Pererushev, moved to the Central Artillery Design Bureau. Nevertheless, the organization of production proceeded under very difficult conditions. Instead of the 500 workers expected in January and 2,000 in February, only 214 arrived. There was a serious shortage of design personnel. By March 1, 1943, the Chief Designer's Department had 58 people instead of 70, and the Technical Bureau had 107 people instead of 254. The first drawings for the T-80 tank began to arrive in early March 1943. By April 1st, the factory had received 446 out of 550 machine tools, with 352 of them installed. By the same time, 3,299 workers had arrived, but 933 of them had to be rejected as physically unfit. Most of the remaining workers had low qualifications. There were also problems with the supply of components from subcontractors. For example, throughout the entire second quarter of 1943, Gaz named after Molotov was only able to supply 12 M80 engines. The shortage of engines became the main obstacle to fulfilling State Defense Committee Resolution No. 26661. Despite all the difficulties, the assembly of the first T-80 tanks began in Mitishi in April 1943. Although tank assembly was carried out under very strenuous conditions, by May 1st, 5 tanks were delivered, 2 of which were radio-equipped. By June 1st, an additional 7 tanks were delivered, and all previously produced vehicles were equipped with radio stations. Production of the T-80 tank then completely halted for 1 month. In June, the factory workers assembled 8 tanks, but the military did not accept them. The senior military representative at Factory Number 40, Engineer Major Slyuzarev, heavily criticized the management in his report, accusing them of inaction. Perhaps he was partly right. The organization of production in some areas was slow. However, it is important to understand that it is impossible to simply establish a tank factory almost from scratch in 3 to 4 months. Expect it to meet a substantial production plan and maintain quality simultaneously. Given the severe shortage of personnel and production capacities that were not fully operational, no other results could have been expected. Defects in the Mitishi-produced tanks were quite common. From May to June 1943, 4 instances of final drive failures and 2 instances of main drive failures were noted. The installation of the artillery system caused numerous complaints. In addition to defects in the recoil mechanism similar to those observed at Gaz named after Molotov, assembly defects were also noted. For example, the TMF sight, which was temporarily installed instead of the TP-80 sight, allowed firing at an elevation angle of no more than 50 to 53 degrees. In fact, all tanks produced in April and May 1943 required modifications. This was highlighted by the test results of a May production T-80 tank, which was sent to the Scientific Research and Testing Proving Ground in June 1943. After 230 miles of travel, the gears of the main and final drives broke, at which point the warranty mileage ended. At the beginning of July, the factory had a backlog of 22 tanks. In July, only 3 new tanks were actually assembled, with the remaining ones being finalized. The backlog also included 11 tanks from April and May of 1943, which underwent significant modifications. This fact led to an error in assessing the number of T-80 tanks produced by Factory Number 40. July also saw the first dispatches. 6 T-80 tanks went to the Gorki Tank School, and another 5 vehicles went to the Sizran Tank School. The command of the Workers' and Peasants' Red Army decided not to send the very first T-80 tanks to combat units. Mass production only began in August, with 40 tanks delivered. However, after the Battle of Kursk, the main armored directorate of the Red Army concluded that further production of the T-70 and T-80 was pointless. According to State Defense Committee Resolution Number 3964SS, dated August 21, 1943, production of the T-80 at Factory Number 40 ceased on September 1st. The factory began producing the Su-15M, also known as the Su-76M. The total production volume of the T-80 in Mitishi was 66 tanks. Considering the 8 T-80 tanks from Gaz named after Molotov, not all of which were accepted by the customer, and 2 experimental T-80 tanks, a total of 76 T-80 tanks were built. Meanwhile, Factory Number 176 managed to manufacture 334 sets of hulls and turrets. Despite all the problems, the vehicle turned out to be quite successful. Its creators, led by N.A. Astrov, deservedly received the second-degree Stalin Prize for 1943. They were clearly not to blame that the era of light tanks, in their traditional sense, had come to an end. 54 T-80 tanks from the main series were distributed among 2 tank regiments. On August 27, 1943, train number 109993 departed for Tula with 27 T-80 tanks, intended for the 54th Separate Tank Regiment. Another 27 tanks were sent by train number 10 to 235 to equip the 230th Tank Regiment, which was also located in Tula. Initially, the crews had to contend with their new vehicles. The quality of their assembly remained quite low, which quickly became apparent during tank crew training. Torsion bars broke, ball bearings fell out of the turret race, and defects were discovered in the final drives. Both regiments equipped with T-80 tanks ended up operating together with cavalry units. From October 8, 1943, the 230th Tank Regiment operated in conjunction with the 2nd Guards Cavalry Division. Its first combat mission was to cross the Dnieper River. By the time it entered combat, the 230th Tank Regiment was equipped with 10 T-34 tanks, 18 T-80 tanks, and 1 T-70 tank. On October 10th, the regiment, in cooperation with the cavalrymen, stormed Zatinsk. The 1st Tank Company, commanded by Senior Lieutenant A.V. Oganessian, distinguished itself during this action, operating 4 T-34 tanks and 3 T-80 tanks. The tanks were used not only to support the cavalry, but also as a means of transporting cavalrymen to the battle site. On October 10th, the regiment lost 1 T-80 tank burned out and 2 T-80 tanks damaged. The next day, the regiment's tanks rescued cavalrymen surrounded in Sykevka. On October 12th, fierce battles for Zatinsk resumed. During these battles, they managed to destroy 3 self-propelled guns, most likely Marder models, 6 Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks, 2 armored personnel carriers, 1 armored car, and 3 trucks. Soviet tank crew losses included 3 T-80 tanks burned out and 2 T-34 tanks damaged, with 5 men killed and 10 wounded. The 7th Guards Cavalry Regiment, operating alongside them, lost 7 men killed and 30 wounded. Fierce battles for Zatonsk continued for several days. Overall, between October 10th and 20th, the 230th Tank Regiment lost 20 men killed, 28 wounded, and 1 tank crewman missing in action. By November 3rd, the unit had 4 T-34 tanks, 12 T-80 tanks, and 1 T-70 tank remaining. On November 5th, the regiment was tasked with attacking Rakovka in cooperation with the cavalrymen and establishing a stronghold there. Operating jointly with the cavalry, the tank crews reached the area of Korostyshiv in the Zhytomyr region by November 11th. The regiment's losses included 1 T-34 tank burned out and 1 T-80 tank damaged. By the 14th, the regiment was in Zhytomyr. The next day, German forces counterattacked, and heavy defensive battles began. On November 19th, the regimental commander, Lieutenant Colonel D.A. Shcherbakov, was killed. According to other reports, he was severely wounded here and died on April 1, 1945. During the battles for Zhytomyr, the regiment lost 5 tanks. 8 men were killed, 10 were wounded, and 22 were reported missing. On November 19th, Zhytomyr again fell into German hands, and it was not liberated until December 31st. The 230th Tank Regiment was sent for reorganization. The 54th Tank Regiment operated jointly with the 12th Guards Cavalry Division. Like the 230th Tank Regiment, the regiment had 10 T-34 medium tanks in addition to its light tanks. Throughout almost all of October, the regiment pursued the retreating enemy. A real battle unfolded for Poyarkin in the Kherson region on October 29, 1943. Here, the regiment lost 5 T-34 tanks and 2 T-80 tanks, while destroying 2 enemy self-propelled guns and 2 enemy tanks. By January 1, 1944, the regiment still had 6 T-34 tanks and 25 T-80 tanks. With this composition, the unit participated in battles during January and February 1944. During this time, 2 T-80 tanks were lost to enemy fire, and the remaining tanks became inoperable due to technical reasons. On April 22nd, the regiment received 20 Valentine 9 tanks. Repair Factory No. 8 was responsible for repairing T-80 tanks. This factory was located in Kiev by the spring of 1944. In July 1944, the factory repaired and delivered 4 tanks, and in August, 12 tanks. In the summer of 1944, these vehicles saw their last combat deployment. Again, they fought as part of tank regiments attached to cavalry divisions. For example, the 61st Tank Regiment had 4 T-80 tanks, and the 58th Tank Regiment had 2. After the Lvov-Sandomierz operation, these tanks were used for training. As of 1946, about 24 of these vehicles remained, located at the Kharkov Tank School. Unfortunately, they have not survived to the present day. However, 1 T-80 tank has been preserved in Kubinka and can be seen in a museum exhibition.